Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are undertaking what might be our most fundamental challenge yet.
Hmm.
We are going to look at a defining problem in the history of thought, philosophical skepticism.
Right.
And not just whether we can know certain things, but whether you can even know that you're sitting where you're sitting right now.
And that sounds like, an academic parlor trick. But the sources we're deep diving into, Barry Stroud's rigorous analysis of Descartes' meditations, show that this is anything but trivial.
Okay.
Stroud is arguing that the only honest, logical answer to the most basic questions about physical reality is, and I'm quoting here, we cannot know anything about the world around us.
And crucially, Stroud isn't a skeptic himself trying to convert us. He's more like an investigator.
Exactly. He's tracing the path that leads to this extreme conclusion. He argues that the fault lies not in some obscure philosophical loophole, but in the very standards we use every single day to judge what's true.
So our mission today is to follow that trail of breadcrumbs, define the exact language used, and rigorously test the logical structure that leads to what sounds like an intellectual catastrophe.
It is. Stroud's goal is not to solve the problem. He's actually rather pessimistic about finding a solution. His mission is deeper.
Which is?
It's to understand its source, to pinpoint precisely why the negative answer, total skepticism, seems logically inevitable if we correctly follow the reasoning that Descartes starts in his first meditation.
So the text is really a warning.
It's a profound warning that our common everyday understanding of what knowledge even means is on trial.
So we have to start where Descartes started. He famously decided that he'd built his entire structure of belief on, shaky foundations. He wanted to wipe the slate clean, only accept things that were absolutely rigorously certain.
Yes. Descartes reached a point where he decided to engage in a kind of general intellectual cleansing. He resolved to sit back and reflect on everything he had ever learned or discovered.
Everything he just took to be true.
Everything. What philosophers call putative knowledge. And his motivation was absolute, to determine what truly amounts to knowledge and to separate it, rigorously from mere belief or guesswork or things you just accept on authority.
And that universal assessment is the starting gun for this whole debate that Stroud is analyzing.
So let's start with Stroud's central claim, his executive thesis. It governs this entire deep dive.
Okay, let's have it.
The application of our ordinary familiar standards for evaluating knowledge claims, when applied universally to all sensory experience, necessitates the skeptical conclusion that we cannot know anything about the world around us.
Wow. Okay, that is a staggering claim because it implicates us.
How so?
It suggests that the rules we naturally use to vet information, the rules a juror uses for an alibi or a scientist for a finding, are the very rules that, when you push them to their logical conclusion, end up destroying everything we thought we knew.
And we have to remember the context here, the sort of philosophical problem this is all responding to.
Right, the problem of the external world.
Which is fundamentally about validating our sensory beliefs.
Meaning, the problem is showing that what we see, touch, and hear actually corresponds to a reality that exists independently of us.
Precisely. Stroud's text is responding to that foundational challenge, which Descartes articulated so well, of showing how our beliefs about the physical world can ever be validated as genuine knowledge.
And the reason it's so difficult.
The reason is this crucial, simple observation that all of our sensory input is inherently compatible with states of deception. Most obviously, the possibility that you are merely dreaming.
Let's focus on that concept of ordinary standards for a moment. Stroud spends a lot of time showing how familiar this process of reviewing knowledge actually is. It's not philosophy, really. It's common sense.
Right. Think about it. You do this all the time. If you hold a belief and someone challenges it, you typically look for the source of that belief and you ask, is that source reliable?
Like the classic example of the common cold. For centuries, people believed getting your feet wet caused a cold. You'd investigate that today and ask, what's the source? Is it a scientific study, or is it just anecdotal evidence, passed down?
You're checking the reliability of the principle that led to the belief. And if you find the source is unreliable, say it's an old wives' tale that's contradicted by modern virology, you discard the belief.
Right. Not because it's impossible, but because the basis for claiming it was insufficient.
Or take the juror example. If you're on a jury and the alibi for the suspect comes from a single, maybe biased witness, you start to reflect.
Do I really know this person was 1,000 miles away?
You'd reflect on the source, the witness's credentials, their motivation. It's a piecemeal assessment focused on one specific claim, and you can get a positive verdict, the claim checks out, or a negative one.
Okay, so here's the crucial pivot. The move from that ordinary piecemeal assessment to a full-blown philosophical inquiry. How does Descartes justify taking that familiar practice and just applying it to all of his beliefs at once?
Well, that's the logical hurdle, because the number of things we believe is indefinitely large. I mean, Stroud points out it probably doesn't even make sense to try and count them.
So a belief-by-belief assessment is just impossible.
You'd die long before you got through your knowledge of history, let alone your day-to-day life.
It's the sheer quantity. You can't check every drop of water in the ocean one by one.
Correct. So Descartes needs a method for assessing huge classes of beliefs all at once. And he finds this by looking for common sources or channels, which he calls principles of human knowledge.
So you test the source, not the individual beliefs.
Exactly. If you can examine the reliability of the source, you can assess all the beliefs that rely on it at the same time, and if that source is found to be fundamentally flawed,
The entire class of beliefs just collapses.
and the most immediate, the most voluminous source of our beliefs is, of course, the senses.
Undeniably.
Descartes puts it very strongly. He says, all that up to the present time I have accepted as most true and certain I have learned, either from the senses or through the senses.
So even if you exempt things like pure mathematics, the senses sight, hearing, touch, they are the primary source for the vast majority of our everyday experiential knowledge.
So assessing the senses means assessing our entire domain of what we call sensory or empirical knowledge.
And we have to be careful here because Stroud notes that a common first reaction is to just dismiss the senses because they sometimes trick us.
Right, a tower looks around from a distance, but it's really square. An oar in water looks bent.
But Stroud and Descartes both reject that as too easy, too facile a condemnation.
Right, an occasional failure under specific, non-ideal circumstances. That's not a general argument against the reliability of the senses as a whole.
That'd be like saying all memory is unreliable because you forgot where you parked your car once.
Exactly. It only shows there are certain times where reliability drops. So the skeptical argument has to be much stronger. It has to strike at the senses even when they are operating under the most favorable conditions imaginable.
It has to demonstrate a fundamental structural flaw, not just an occasional misfire.
Precisely. And to get that general verdict, Descartes starts his investigation with the most perfect example he can find.
He's sitting in a warm room by the fire in a dressing gown, holding a piece of paper.
This is the best possible case of sensory knowledge.
And this move is so critical because Stroud argues that if a negative verdict is reached here, it legitimately supports a general conclusion about all sensory knowledge.
Right. If the best candidates, the beliefs formed under perfect conditions, are found wanting, then all the others formed under worse conditions must also fall short.
It's a generalization by negative induction.
And here's the core moment in the Meditations where the skeptical bomb is dropped. In this best possible case, Descartes suddenly realizes something.
What's that?
He says, I am a man, and that consequently I am in the habit of sleeping, and in my dreams representing to myself the same things. The crucial shift is this acknowledgement of the dream possibility.
And then he finds the missing piece of the puzzle.
So manifestly that there are no certain indications by which we may clearly distinguish wakefulness from sleep.
And with that one realization,
He has lost the whole world. Because if everything he can ever learn about the external world comes through the senses, and he cannot tell by means of the senses whether he is dreaming,
then all his sensory experiences are compatible with him merely dreaming.
and if he can't fulfill that necessary condition of knowing that he's not dreaming, he can't claim to know anything about the world around him. This structural trap is what Stroud wants us to understand.
Okay, before we jump into the logical chain that binds us, we need to get our definitions straight. These philosophical terms are often used differently than in, normal conversation.
An excellent idea. Let's start with the intended destination of the argument.
The conclusion.
The conclusion we are trying to understand is skepticism about the external world. This is defined strictly as the conclusion that it is impossible for anyone to possess knowledge of the world around us.
So it's not just doubt. It's the impossibility of knowledge.
It is. This is the negative verdict Descartes reaches at the end of the first meditation.
Okay, and what Descartes starts with is everything he thinks he knows. We call that putative knowledge.
Right. Putative knowledge refers to all those things you believe or take to be true, but whose standing as genuine knowledge hasn't been determined yet by this rigorous universal assessment.
So it's everything in your head before the philosophical scrutiny begins. The belief you're sitting in a chair, the belief there's a city outside your window.
All putative knowledge, until it's validated. And the mechanism Descartes uses to manage this massive volume of beliefs are the principles of human knowledge.
Which are these general sources or channels of belief, like the senses?
Exactly, whose reliability can be assessed all at once. The entire Cartesian project depends on finding and testing these principles. If the principle is sound, the beliefs are justified. If it's rotten,
They all collapse.
and the particular class of knowledge under fire here is sensory empirical knowledge.
So knowledge from sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell.
The vast majority of our everyday practical knowledge, knowing where an object is, knowing a noise just happened, this is the domain the skeptical argument attacks.
And it attacks it using that central mechanism, the dream possibility.
Right. And this is the possibility that your current, seemingly coherent sensory experiences are entirely compatible with you merely dreaming that the external state of affairs is happening.
And Stroud stresses that the force of this isn't that dreams are deceptive.
No, the force lies in the fact that even if what you dream happens to be true, you still don't know it.
That's the technical heart of it, the distinction between truth and knowledge. Can you give us that Duke of Devonshire example again? It really illustrates this perfectly.
Certainly. So imagine the Duke of Devonshire is speaking in the House of Lords.
Okay.
If he believes he is speaking there because he is dreaming he is speaking there, even though, coincidentally, he is physically standing there and speaking, he does not possess knowledge.
His belief is true, but the basis for it?
The basis, the dream experience, lacks the necessary connection to reality. The dream state, being merely subjective, voids the claim to knowledge, even if the content happens to align with the facts.
And the absence of a tool to break this block leads to the next two definitions. First, the missing piece. Certain indications.
These would be reliable, non-sensory dependent criteria or tests that could definitively distinguish wakefulness from sleep. Descartes concludes they don't exist.
Why not?
Because, structurally, anything you can experience in your waking life can also be dreamt about. The search for these indications is what leads the argument into its impossible circular trap.
And if you can't find those indications, you become enclosed, trapped behind the veil of sensory experiences.
And that's the conceptual barrier. It confines knowledge entirely to your internal representations, what Descartes called ideas of external things, leaving the actual independent external reality inaccessible to certain knowledge.
So if we're stuck behind this veil,
We only know how things seem to us, not how things are beyond those internal perceptions. And the skeptic's job is to show that we are fundamentally logically trapped here.
okay, with those definitions in place, the real tension emerges when we see how they're assembled into that skeptical chain of reasoning.
So Stroud argues that the dream argument is the most robust and compelling engine of skepticism. It doesn't rely on, some evil demon.
Great, no exotic scenarios.
It relies on a structural flaw in our everyday knowledge standards. So we are going to reconstruct the argument, focusing really intensely on what each premise means.
This is the heart of the deep dive. We're boiling down centuries of philosophy into 5 precise, devastating steps.
And the entire argument rests on what Stroud calls the universal condition of knowledge, which on its face seems completely reasonable.
Okay, what is it?
P1, the universal condition of knowledge. To know any proposition about the world and basis of sensory experience, you must be able to rule out all possibilities, D, that are incompatible with you knowing P.
Okay, let's expand on that. Why does that feel so intuitively correct? It's because it's just a generalization of our common practice. If I claim to know the car in the parking lot is black, and you point out it might be dark blue paint that only looks black in the shadow, I have to rule out that dark blue possibility before my claim can stand as certain knowledge.
Exactly. This is the ruling out requirement we apply constantly. If you claim to know it's a goldfinch, you must know it's not a canary, because being a canary is incompatible with being a goldfinch.
So the skeptical move is to treat dreaming as just another universal possibility that has to be ruled out.
Right. If our standards demand we rule out the canary, they must demand we rule out the dream.
Because both are incompatible with genuine knowledge.
But Stroud provides a crucial technical distinction here about incompatibility, which is essential to understanding why the dream possibility is so powerful.
Yeah.
There are 2 forms. The first, the most familiar one, is when the possibility D is incompatible with P being true. That's the goldfinch canary case. If it's a canary, the proposition it is a goldfinch is false.
And the second form?
The second, more dangerous form is when the possibility D is incompatible merely with you knowing P, even if P is actually true. and the dream possibility falls into the second category.
So P2 addresses this second category head-on using the logic of the Duke of Devonshire.
P2, the incompatibility. If you are dreaming that P is true, you do not thereby know that P is true, even if P is in fact true at that moment.
Right, so the Duke's belief is true, but his basis for belief is just coincidence, a dream. Therefore, the dream state is incompatible with the state of knowing.
Correct. This premise relies only on that common sense, undeniable fact that knowledge requires a sound connection between the belief and the fact, and a dream provides no such connection.
So since P1 says we must rule out all incompatible possibilities, and P2 establishes that dreaming is an incompatible possibility.
The next premise follows as a pure deduction.
Let's hear it.
P3, the necessary prerequisite. Because the possibility of dreaming, D, is incompatible with knowing P via the senses, one must know that one is not dreaming if one is to know anything about the world around them via the senses.
And that is the killer condition. If you accept P1 and P2, you must accept P3.
Stroud makes it very clear that if we accept our everyday standards for knowledge validation, we are logically compelled to require this prerequisite.
You have to know you're awake before you can claim to know there's a fire.
And P3 applies to all sensory knowledge. Descartes ensured this universality by choosing that best possible case scenario.
The fire example.
P4, the universal applicability. The case Descartes considers, sitting by the fire, holding paper, is a best possible case of sensory knowledge. Any negative verdict here legitimately supports a general conclusion about all sensory knowledge.
Let's spend a moment here. Why is it legitimate to generalize? I mean, the failure seems structural. It's not that the sensory apparatus is bad.
Exactly. It's that the logical structure of validation fails, even in ideal circumstances. Stroud notes this is an argument about the source, the principle of knowledge.
So if the fundamental requirement for validation P3 can't be met in the most pristine example, then the principle itself is universally flawed.
Right. If the foundation of the house can't support the roof will collapse, whether the rest of the house is built of stone or cardboard. If the senses, even at their peak, can't provide the confirmation needed to fulfill P3, then they fail as a reliable principle of human knowledge entirely.
So we've established that we must know we are not dreaming to know anything about the world. But how do we prove that? That leads to the failure point, P5.
P5, the failure of the test. Since anything that can be experienced in waking life can also be dreamt, there are no certain indications within sensory experience itself to clearly distinguish wakefulness from sleep.
P5 is the dagger and says the only source of information we have, the senses, is structurally incapable of providing the evidence needed to validate the conditions set in P3. The source cannot validate itself.
And that leads directly and logically to the final conclusion.
Which is?
C, the conclusion. Therefore, the necessary condition for knowledge, P3, can never be fulfilled, and no one can know anything about the world around them on the basis of the senses.
The terrifying thing about Stroud's analysis is that the argument is airtight if you grant the premises, particularly that demand in P3.
It means the only way to avoid total skepticism is to show why P3, the requirement to know you're not dreaming, is not genuinely a necessary condition of knowledge.
But Stroud thinks our everyday behavior suggests that we already accept it.
We feel the intuitive pull of P3 because it fits our general rules. We instinctively feel we have to rule out possibilities that undermine a knowledge claim, and dreaming is clearly an undermining possibility, as the Duke showed.
The challenge is showing why we can rule out the canary but are allowed to ignore the dream.
If the dream possibility is structurally relevant, then the conclusion of total skepticism is absolutely inevitable.
Okay, now we need to stop abstracting and look at why P5, the failure of the test, is so absolute. This is where the logical machinery gets truly vicious.
What's fascinating here is the mechanism of failure. The skeptical argument isn't defeated by proposing a better test.
No.
It's designed to defeat any test you could possibly propose. This is the structural logical block. It's self-referential. It creates an infinite regress.
Okay, so the crucial failure occurs because the test we use to prove we're awake is itself subject to the same skepticism it's supposed to resolve.
Exactly.
I might think, I know I'm awake because I can feel the texture of this paper in my hand. But the skeptic immediately asks,
how do you know you aren't just dreaming? You feel the texture of the paper. Precisely. Stroud analyzes how Descartes tries to determine that he is not dreaming in order to fulfill P3. To do that, he needs some reliable, certain indication, let's call it test T, that only a waking person could experience. But the logical trap ensnares T immediately.
Let's break down that critical logical hurdle step by step. Explain why test T destroys itself.
Okay, step one, the goal. I want to establish knowledge, K, of the external world, say that I'm sitting by the fire. To do this, I must fulfill the necessary condition, P3. I must know I'm not dreaming.
Got it.
Step two, the proposed solution, the test T. I invent test T. Maybe it's reading a complex paragraph of philosophy or counting the bricks in the chimney.
Things that seem to require coherence and cognitive rigor that's incompatible with sleep.
Right, and I believe I have performed T successfully.
Step 3.
The skeptical block, applying P5. Stroud emphasizes that because anything one can experience in one's waking life can also be dreamt about, I could be merely dreaming that I performed test T successfully.
Dreaming of reading the complex sentence, dreaming of counting the bricks.
Exactly. The sensory experience of success in test T is logically compatible with the state of dreaming, and that leads to step 4, the regress.
Which is?
To validate T, I now need a further piece of knowledge, T2, which confirms that I wasn't dreaming of T. I need to know T was real.
But wait, T2 is itself a fact about the world. And knowing T2 requires already knowing I'm not dreaming.
You've got it. And since T2 is an experience, T2 could also be dreamt, requiring a T3 and so on, infinitely.
The test designed to validate our waking state requires that we are already in the waking state for it to be effective. It's the ultimate circular logic.
Absolutely. The knowledge that T was successfully performed presupposes the very knowledge that I am not dreaming that T was supposed to provide.
It's a closed loop.
Stroud's key argument here is that the particular test or state of affairs already in question cannot serve as a guarantee of its own authenticity, since it might have been merely dreamt. No sensory test can ever establish the antecedent condition.
So the entire system collapses because the evidence needed to escape the dream trap is itself trapped inside the dream. You can never get out.
And since P3 is a necessary prerequisite for all sensory knowledge, its unfulfillability guarantees the skeptical conclusion.
This is incredibly difficult to visualize just as philosophy, which is why Stroud's analogy is so helpful.
The television room analogy, it perfectly captures this state of imprisonment.
Okay, walk us through it.
Imagine, listener, that you are locked in a room. It's full of television sets, and you're desperately trying to find out what's happening in the world outside that room.
So the television screens represent all our sensory experiences, the sights, the sounds, the feelings, the data stream of our internal mental life.
Exactly. And the world outside the room represents the external, independent reality, the physical world of objects and other people.
So you're watching the screens, they show you pictures of a bustling city. You might suspect the cameras outside are broken, or maybe the pictures are pre-recorded, or even entirely fabricated by some generator inside the room.
You are, in effect, posing the skeptical question. Are these screens reliable guides to the world outside?
And what do you do to confirm their reliability? You switch on more sets, you turn to a new channel, you zoom in, you check the sound.
But switching on more sets, getting more sensory experiences, more pictures, only provides more pictures on more screens. Stroud points out that all those pictures will be no help to you without independent information.
Knowledge not derived from the screens themselves.
Knowledge about how the pictures you see are connected with what's going on outside the room.
And the problem is that, according to the skeptical structure, the screens, our sensory experience, are the only source of information we have about the world.
You are imprisoned within those representations. You know the patterns on the screens, but you can never, with certainty, validate if they reliably map to an external reality.
So every sensory experience we have, the sound of my voice, the chair you're sitting on right now, is, by this logic, just another picture on a screen, which might or might not map to anything real.
And the failure of test T, which we just discussed, that's the mechanism that locks the door on the television room. It denies us any possible knowledge that could serve as the independent validation required to link our internal representations to the external world. And we connect this to the bigger picture. The consequences are, well, they're truly disastrous. They reach far beyond academia. If Stroud's reconstruction of Descartes' logic holds, we are in a truly restricted position.
Permanently sealed off.
Behind that veil of sensory experiences.
So what are the parameters of this confinement? What knowledge are we actually allowed to keep if the external world is lost?
Very little. Knowledge is restricted entirely to our ideas or facts about how things seem to us internally.
So I can know I'm having this sensation of heat or the mental image of a piece of paper.
But you cannot know that the fire exists outside of that sensation or that the paper is physically real.
So even if my conviction that I'm sitting here by the fire is true, if it can't be validated against that skeptical challenge, it's not knowledge.
Correct. Stroud emphasizes this point. It's merely a subjective, perhaps reliable but unvalidated belief. The external world, whatever it might be like, is perpetually beyond our grasp. The skeptic isn't denying the world exists.
Just that we can know it exists.
And this loss is comprehensive. It strips away every physical object we interact with.
Tables, chairs, trees.
Our own bodies as external physical entities. Why? Because Stroud observes that what we perceive, what we're in direct sensory contact with, is never a physical object or state of affairs, but only a representation.
The representation of the chair could be exactly the way it is, even if there were no physical objects at all.
The internal realm is all that remains as certain.
If that's the case, the implications become truly isolating. Because we don't just lose objects, we lose relationships.
This is the most profound implication of the skeptical predicament. Critically, we lose knowledge of other people. If other people exist, they are not simply sensory experiences of mine. They are independent physical and mental entities that inhabit that unreachable world beyond the veil, right alongside the tables and chairs.
Other people are just external objects, so they're lost to us.
Precisely. Stroud drives this home by stating the inevitable conclusion of this radical individualism. I would have no more reason to believe that there are any other people than I have to believe that I am now sitting in a chair writing.
Both are facts about the external world that cannot be confirmed.
Which means there's no possibility of communal knowledge. The solace of shared experience, the idea that I may not know, but we collectively know, is shattered. If you are trapped behind the veil, you are trapped alone.
Wow. The predicament is purely individual.
Your own sensory experiences don't make it possible for you to know things about the physical world, so they certainly don't make it possible for you to know if there are any other perceiving beings at all. The logical consequence is total solitude. You're the sole consciousness in the television room.
Okay, given how catastrophic and, frankly, existentially isolating this conclusion is, the most common response is what Stroud calls the facile dismissive response. We just shrug it off. This is all just philosophy. I'm going back to my life where I still know the sun will rise.
And Stroud argues we have to resist that. That facile dismissal misunderstands the true threat. The skepticism isn't about some new esoteric real knowledge or an exotic, hitherto unheard of domain called reality.
It's not an attack on philosophy. It's an attack on our shared everyday practice.
The question the non-philosopher asks is, why should I care that I don't know I'm sitting down if the belief is useful and reliable enough for me to live my life?
Right.
Stroud's rebuttal is powerful. If Descartes' method genuinely parallels our ordinary everyday assessments of knowledge, like checking the alibi or determining if the goldfinch claim holds up, then the resulting lack of knowledge is the very thing we thought we possessed at the outset.
Okay, explain that.
When you discover the alibi was faulty, you don't say, well, I still have my useful alibi belief. You deny that you know the man was in Cleveland.
So, we are denying knowledge of the fire in the same way we deny knowledge of the alibi's location.
Exactly. Stroud insists there is no suggestion in ordinary cases that we have elevated our conception of knowledge into something else called real knowledge. We're simply asking whether we know that thing, as opposed to merely believing it.
So if Descartes' investigation of the fire example is structurally similar to those ordinary cases, as Stroud insists it is,
his negative verdict must have the same significance. We are denying that we know we are sitting by the fire in the most common, everyday sense of the word know. The problem, therefore, is not with some invented external world, but with the structural integrity of our fundamental conception of knowledge itself.
It forces us into an incredibly uncomfortable spot. The only way out is to show that Descartes' initial setup, that his investigation follows our familiar procedures, is somehow flawed.
That is the true challenge Stroud leaves us with. The skeptical conclusion is true if we accept P3. The requirement to know you are not dreaming is an indispensable part of our ordinary standards.
And if we can't explain why the goldfinch canary rule applies, but the dream rule does not,
then we are logically bound to the negative conclusion. The problem forces us to reconsider the most basic requirement for knowing anything at all.
The ultimate lesson here is that skepticism isn't some fringe philosophical position.
No. It's a necessary logical consequence of accepting what we believe to be the simplest, most obvious rules for certifying knowledge.
So this deep dive into Stroud's reconstruction has been incredibly clarifying, if a bit unsettling. We've seen that the skeptical conclusion is true if we accept Descartes' requirement, P3, that we must know we are not dreaming to know anything about the world.
And P3 seems necessary because it's just an extension of our common rule. Rule out possibilities that are incompatible with knowledge. Stroud's analysis just restates the core philosophical problem. The only logical way to avoid the disastrous, isolating conclusion is to reject that condition, the necessity of knowing we're not dreaming.
But rejecting P3 is immensely difficult because, logically, it feels like an obvious requirement of knowledge. It's an extension of the same rule we use every day when we evaluate evidence.
Right. The investigation into skepticism has revealed that we lack a clear, justifiable principle for defining the limits of what must be ruled out in ordinary life.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We started by reviewing our knowledge, an activity we perform constantly when we check facts or verify sources. But when we push that review to its universal philosophical limit, we discover that our deepest intuitions about what knowledge means, specifically the necessity of ruling out possibilities that undermine the reliability of the source, lead us directly to reject everything we thought we knew about external reality.
Stroud's rigorous analysis suggests that philosophical skepticism, far from being some abstract exercise, is logically derived from accepting what seems like a simple and obvious fact about knowledge and just pushing it universally.
So if you look at the best possible case of sensory knowledge,
Yeah.
and you agree that the experience is compatible with merely dreaming,
The only way to avoid the total loss of the world is to stop demanding that you must know you are awake. And here's the final provocative thought for you to mull over.
okay,
If you found Descartes' dream argument compelling, if you felt that, yes, you should be able to rule out dreaming to know you were sitting there, then you have demonstrated that you already accept the universal condition of knowledge, P1, and its consequence, P3, which Stroud argues leads inevitably to the total loss of external world knowledge. The profound question, then, is not whether skepticism is true, but why our deepest, most common-sense intuitions about knowledge lead us to such a catastrophic, self-negating conclusion when they're applied universally.